Good afternoon, Yahuwah's people. It's such a good day to be alive. I want you right now to inhale and hold it for a moment and then just let it go. Forget all your troubles, forget all your worries, because you really don't have any. Just breathe in deeply and exhale. Close your eyes and just take in and imagine all the things that you desire. And how so many other people are inclusive in your desires. Because it's not just about you. Ease your mind. We said before that you are not the mind. Let go of your ego. And just focus on your breathing. Focus on the universe. Focus on a breeze, being outside in nature, being among the trees and the birds. Breathe in and exhale. Now, doesn't that feel good? Good afternoon again. This is Seth Moore coming to you again here on Anchor by Spotify. We're here to continue our series, and we're going to pick up where we left off on yesterday. We're still talking about the whitening of Latin America. And as you hear Scott Buckley in the background, focus on your third eye. Center yourself. It's good to be alive, y'all. Because your life has meaning. Okay, and so we're going to get started in a moment, and we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we're going to come back, so stay right with us. Okay, and we're back. So again, we're going to pick up from where we left off, and I want you, we're very intentional about what we're doing, as should you be about what you do. Okay? As I reiterated on a numerous amount of occasions, that is, you have to find, if you already haven't, a center within your universe where something is important to you outside of your own personal circumference, outside of your own personal life, things that you have to do every day to survive, or to live, rather. That's a better term, to live, not survive. You have to have something outside of you that affects more than just you. That's what you're here for. You have to affect change outside of your circle of yourself, your family, your activities, your career, your goals. This is where you're going to find real satisfaction when you really begin to have inclusiveness about your life. See, because for so long, and a lot of this was thrust upon us because of the culture that we're in. Okay? And so, but you have to shake that. You have to shake it. You really have to shake the self-centered, selfish attitude or mentality or ego mind, as I've said many times before, and begin to be inclusive in the things that you do. And you can do small things. Give to people. You know, if you see somebody in need, give to them. You know, you have some clothes in your closet. You know somebody can use some. Give some away. Invite somebody to dinner. Do something good for someone, so that your life is a life of inclusivity, where you take in more than just your own ideals and things that you want to achieve. And the things that you want to achieve should have inclusiveness involved in them. So we're going to, we just want to say that, and we're going to start. I don't want to overwhelm you with a whole lot of preliminaries, okay? So, and I hope you're finding this subject real interesting. And like I said, there's a lot of information that we're going to be giving you and bringing to you. And so I hope that you continue to tune in and stay with us and give us a like and a share. And we're so grateful for you doing that. So we're going to begin, okay? And we left off on yesterday, so chances are I might be repetitive on some of the things that I've already covered. And this may be a small portion of it as we lead into the next chapter of this series, okay? So it says here, this was particularly the case, Ortiz argued, with members of the white working class because of their often tenuous ties to European civilization and their psychic proximity to African primitivism. Now, you heard me read that yesterday, and I'm going over this again, okay? Brazilian writers agreed that poor whites were vulnerable to Africanization and that even the middle and upper class were by no means immune. Baha'ian physician and anthropologist Nina Rodriguez diagnosed African fetish animism as a contagious psychological state that could pass to the weakest among the upper classes who are constantly in danger of turning black. Now, as we know, that's a lot of nonsense. Journalist Pablo Barreto reported in a 1906 that Rio de Janeiro middle class lives in thrall to witchcraft, to that mob of black men and women of priests and priestesses. We are the ones who finance its existence with all the affections of businessmen for his showgirl mistress. Witchcraft is our vice, our pleasure, our degradation. It demands we give, it exploits, we let ourselves be exploited. It is the master extortionist, the assassin, the thief, always free and strong through the life that our money lends it. So now he's making this declaration about the class of people who are in Rio de Janeiro, because, of course, the populace was an indigenous populace for the most part, predominantly, and begin to elucidate the fact that this culture is really going to become the death of us if we don't do something about it. And of course, we read earlier about how that the whitening of the culture, and they needed to have and infuse more whiteness in the veins of the culture. Okay, so let us read on. In its overwrought, feverish quality, Barreto's language vividly conveys the fears that grip turns of the century elites. Blackness was not something distant, alien, and far removed. To the contrary, as upper middle class whites left their mansions and townhouses each morning to enter the teeming world of the street, Africa began at their doorstep. And see, this is the fear that was prevalent amongst the elites, that the culture of the Africans, would soon become, and had already become, a grave issue for the populace that was there. And so, of course, they had to do something about this, and in ways which you're going to learn more of. Okay, so, and it says here, as I just read, the African began at their doorstep, just as modernizing elites undertook urban renewal, public health, and sanitation campaigns aimed at removing crime and disease from their society. So did they launch campaigns of repression aimed at eliminating African-based religions from national life and bringing those nations into 20th century modernity. In addition to attacking African religions, Brazilians and Cuban authorities sought to eliminate the African content of Carnival and annual festivals of flesh that precedes Lent. Throughout Afro-Latin America, these festivities had deep African roots. During the first half of the 1800s, slaves and free blacks in Buenos Aires, Montevideo, Rio de Janeiro, Salvador, Cartagena, Havana, and other cities gathered for riotous dancing and drumming contests in which each African nation sought to demonstrate its superiority. Carnival was also an occasion through which members of the lower class could briefly turn the tables on their social betters by pelting them with eggs, balloons, and other small missiles filled with water, flour, honey, or cruder substances. So enthusiastically did poor and working class celebrants embrace this opportunity to unpend the social hierarchy that by the 1840s and 1850s, many municipal governments had banned or placed severe limits on carnival. During the second half of the century, as African national organizations gradually faded away, those governments, in alliance with upper-class social clubs and civic organizations, sought to further civilize carnival. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, the focus of the event shifted from unruly street parties to public and private occasions organized and sponsored by local elites, parades of cars and floats and representing elite clubs and comparsas. Groups organized specifically to participate in carnival and formal balls and dances held at the major social clubs and hotels. Now, what was that? Now, what was this actually doing? Okay, they had to find a way, because as more Europeans were coming in to these dark regions and dark areas, they had to acculturate, okay, the culture. So rather than allowing the Africans, the African Cubans, the Africans from Venezuela, from Cuba, from El Salvador, from Costa Rica, from Mexico, from Colombia, all of these Africans that were in these areas, they had to change the dynamics of the culture. So what they did was to begin to create these parades where the elites, okay, were showcased. Where the elites, and mind you, these elites were these people that were showcased were pale people. They were people who, and it was a mixture of people. It was even those who switched over, because some of the Afro-Latinos and some of the Brazilians even usurped and adopted and opted for being white. You understand what I'm saying? So this is what happened. So they began to dismantle a lot of the African cultures that was in those regions to replace them, as you heard me just read. Okay? So this is what was done. And this is going on today, as I mentioned before. Nothing has changed. You have the invaders in Egypt now calling themselves the ancient Kemites. But as I mentioned several times before, the Kemites did not call themselves Egyptians. It's the same thing that's happening in Mexico. They don't show you the indigenous Mexicans when they go to Mexico. They show you the pale Mexicans. They show you those who are not indigenous to Mexico. Okay, so this happens all over the place. It's not done in a vacuum. Okay? This has been going on forever. Wherever you go, acculturation is taking place. They're always trying to wipe out the culture of the indigenous, whether you call them the indigenous Niji, whether you call them the Aborigines, whether you call them what I'm just reading here, and the Black Hawaiians, whether you're calling them, the Indians, wherever you go, there's acculturation that's trying to take place. Okay, now there's some places now that you'll go, and you'll still find black people. Like you'll still find people in Ireland. You'll still find black people in Spain. You'll still find black people in Nova Scotia. You'll still find indigenous people in Paraguay and all these other different places. Okay? But for the most part, a lot of the indigenous people migrated out of these places because, number one, of weather. A lot of the people don't want to be in those colder climates. And those other folks can stand that because that's what they come from. They come from those cold areas. Okay? So as I read, and as you heard, okay, they begin to by the 1840s and 1850s, they said many municipal governments, I'm reading that again, had banned or placed severe limits on carnival. So in other words, you understand that. They started to dismantle, get rid of the celebrations of the Africans. We don't want them celebrating their culture. Okay, we have to wipe out their culture. Okay? We have to get rid of all the dancing and singing and bringing Africa to these areas, because those areas were indigenous to the continent. And it says, as African national organizations gradually faded away, listen, faded away, those governments, in alliance with upper class social clubs and civic organizations, sought to further civilize. Civilize who? Civilize who? Here's the uncivilized talking about civilizing somebody. Civilize carnival. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, the focus of the event shifted, moved away from, that's what that means, from unruly, now they're calling this unruly street parties to public and private occasions organized and sponsored by local elites. Now, this was done by the elites, those, of course, with the money. Okay? Parades of cars and floats representing elite clubs, compasa, groups organized specifically to participate in carnival, and formal balls and dances held at the major social clubs and hotels. These civilized manifestations of carnival dominated newspaper coverage of the annual event, but that coverage simultaneously revealed the continued presence of black street celebrations. They ain't stopped. They said, we ain't gonna stop just because y'all had that. They ain't stopped. If someone, and I quote, if someone from outside were to judge Bahia by its carnival, complained a Salvador newspaper in 1903, they could not fail to place us on par with Africa. See what I'm saying? They made it Africa. They brought Africa right there with them. When the city chief of police began to crack down on black compasa in 1904 and then banned them completely the following year, the relief of Bahia elite was palatable. Although the horrible exhibitions of African drumming and dance have not completely disappeared, they have diminished greatly. The failure of many of these groups to appear this year constituted a great service to civilization. No one has the right to discredit the setting in which they live by reviving African customs. Cuban elites were equally vehement in their condemnation of African-based carnival. You see what I'm saying? So you always have those people who look like you, and all they got to do, and what they do, they always recruit a few of y'all, a few of us, and give them some prestige, just like what's happening today. Give them some money, you know what I'm saying? Let them live in a good part of town. You know, they go to the best restaurants, social clubs, balls, events. Give them a title. And guess what? They will turn their damn back on the whole community. They will turn their back on the community. So this is not anything new. This has been going on forever. It said even some of the Cuban elites, and these were Afro-Cubans, they became upset with the African carnival. Okay, we're going to read on. Every year during carnival, we witness scenes that disgrace our culture and that make one suppose that one part of our population is still influenced by artivism that conflicts with civilization. The spectacle is repugnant. Men and women, all sense of shame lost, parading tumultuously through the streets to the sound of African music, singing monotonous choruses and reproduce it in their movement, gestures that may be appropriate in savage Africa, but that make no sense in civilized Cuba. Listen, you see that? You see that? You know, and you'll get some of your own people who will be ashamed of the culture that they're a part of. And I will say this, and that is, make sure you're doing more than just dancing and singing, because sometimes we dancing and singing too damn much, you know. And while you dancing and singing, they got a pen in their hand writing your demise and stealing land and resources while you dancing and singing. So there are times to celebrate, and there are times then when we should be taking care of business. And something was said about, I'm going to mention this very briefly, something was said about the Alabama brawl. And what was said was that we over-celebrate, and I have to agree with that. That is not a major victory by beating up on some white folks. So while you maybe have a level of you know, jubilee, or you have a level of excitement about what happened, you know, don't overreact. Really. You have more battles to fight than to be so joyous like you won over this one little thing. You did not win anything, because sometimes people don't like taking L's, and they could be planning on a counterattack. So, you know, don't get so overexcited because of that. You know? Really. So again, you know, we have to choose. And I know people are tired. Yeah, you have a right to defend yourself. Of course you do. You know, but you know, we on TV and we making videos and we doing all of this kind of stuff. I mean, granted, okay, you know, but don't overdo it. Because we should have that same energy. We should have that same energy when it comes to working together. And oftentimes we don't. We should have that same energy about coming together. So now that this has happened and it's transpired, let's take that same energy and then let's start to build. Take that same energy and let's come together and put some things together. Take that same energy, yes. That same energy. All right. In 1913, the mayor of Havana declared that the Compasa would be permitted to parade through the streets only if they left their African instruments at home and agreed not to perform African dances. Now, why do you think they wanted them to do that? Because when you play the African drum, when you make chants, when you dance, you're calling on the ancestors. So that's why they wanted them to do that. You're calling on the ancestors, and through calling on the ancestors, it generates power. Not only does it generate power, what you create in the atmosphere is you create a vibration in the atmosphere that sets not only the tone, but it sets a precedence with the ancestors that leaves that same vibration in those areas. So when something happens, those vibrations can be activated. So this is why they wanted them to leave their instruments at home, and if they agreed to not perform African dances, Black carnival groups sought to evade the legislation by using snare drums and other percussion instruments borrowed from military marching bands. But in 1916, the city government tightened restrictions further, making it virtually impossible for the Black Compasas to perform. And in 1925, President Machado extended to the entire country Havana's ban on drums or on analogous instruments of African nature and bodily contortions that offend morality. Really? So they're so moral. But it's not offensive to see gay people in the streets feeling up on one another and all that kind of stuff, though. So, because I'm sure they had white gays in those days there, and they probably during their carnivals, then their elite parades, they probably showcased that. But all that was all right. Okay, now the Black middle class. The war on African-based culture was applauded not just by whites, but listen to this, but by the Black middle class as well. See what I'm saying? They always got a few of us. All the time. They're going to always have a few. They're going to give some money to. They're going to give some things to. And they're going to say, oh, we don't need this. Just like the talented 10th. And I know a lot of you are familiar with the Black Boule, that in the early 1900s, how they sold out the Black community. You got people that you may not even be aware of, like W.E.B. Du Bois and so forth, and all these other men who, with the power elites, sold out the Blacks. They were the gatekeepers of Black progress. So you have to do some studying to find out who these people were. You still have those people today. You have gatekeepers who are the impediments, okay, of Black progress. As I just read. It says it's not only was it the whites, but by the Black middle class as well. Upwardly mobile Blacks and mulattoes were struggling to cross the Great Divide, separating the world of working class poverty from that of middle class respectability. African-based culture was powerfully identified with precisely that working class world of slums and favelas that this talented, listen to this, y'all, that this talented 10th, as I just mentioned, was trying to escape. Admission to the world of the middle class therefore required the complete rejection of that culture and the wholehearted embrace of European models of civilization and progress. So you had to denounce your culture to get your pass into the upper elites of European, to become a European model in that society. And we have a lot of that going on today. Listen, members of the white upper and middle classes worried constantly about the subverting, contaminating effects of Africanization on their societies, but in keeping with the racial determinism of the times, they could always claim a kind of inherited immunity to the encroaching menace of blackness. Upwardly mobile Afro-Latin Americans could make no such claim. In societies that regarded race as a biological fact, that skin, their hair, their facial features signified a direct ancestral link to African-based culture. In order to meet the requirements for admission into civilized society and the national middle class, their rejection of that culture had to be even more emphatic than that of their white counterparts. Listen to this. The black middle class anxious relationship with African-based culture is vividly captured in Afro-Cuban journalist Raphael Serra's ominous metaphor of Africanism as an enormous octopus of innumerable and immeasurable tentacles that stretches out completely and increasingly over all our social body. Struggling to escape those tentacles, Sarah insisted that we, and I quote, who are born in Cuba, owe absolutely nothing to Africa. Listen to this. And reject everything that clashes with culture, civic awareness, and love of good and beauty. People were, so again, as we discussed before in the other podcast, here you have acculturation, assimilation, and amalgamation. Okay? If you can't beat them, what do they say? Join them. That's assimilation. Acculturation is when you're replacing one's cultural identity and one's cultural aesthetics to your culture, or basically, really, it's not your culture because you really don't have one. Basically, you're stealing. So that acculturation is part and parcel with an act of assimilation, and then amalgamation is when one becomes a part of a culture through acceptance and identification. So, and he said, Cuba owes absolutely nothing to Africa and reject everything that clashes with culture, civic awareness, and love of good and beauty. This rejection extended as well to any reminder of the slave past, equally shameful and contaminating. Reporting on the carnival celebrations of 1893, the Afro-Cuban newspaper La Igualdad, Equality, that's what it means, attacked black compasa, whose members had dressed as plantation slaves, displaying the garments and customs of times that were our disgrace. The sinister time of slavery when our race lived in backwardness. That was not backwardness. This sight causes us much sorrow, nor were such sentiments confined to Cuba. Following the Buenos Aires Carnival of 1882, the Afro-Argentine newspaper La Brahma, the Jest, as it's denoted, described the shameful way in which young black merrymakers smear their faces with soot and go off to perform African songs and dances in the chic downtown Florida, which we have had the disgrace of having to endure this year. In Montevideo, the Afro-Uruguayan newspaper La Conservación railed in 1871 against African-based religions and called for doing away once and for all with these faces that are not religions, with these practices that follow no logical principle and serve only to mark the meeting places where the black elements gather. It's a shame, you know. It's really a shame in how they recruit other Africans and those of African descent to shame the culture by putting on blackface, you know, and this whole acculturation and wanting to be a part of this society because you find it too hard to deal with. So I have to come in and I have to actually shame myself and shame my culture to be a part of something for survival. With only a few exceptions, the Afro-Brazilian press was unanimous in its rejection of Africa and African-based cultural practices, regardless of whether individual writers or papers favored or opposed the more controversial goal of national whitening. Blacks and mulattoes who supported whitening could logically and consistently reject any possible connection between Afro-Latin Americans and Africa. So if you accepted the acculturation, saying, okay, even though you was dark as whatever, you could still say, I ain't black. I'm accepting the European way. Okay, I'm not black. And you got a lot of people, how many shows have we seen with people saying, I'm not black? And you looking at them and saying, what? What? Didn't Tiger Woods do that one time? Said he was calibration or some nonsense like that? So you have these people not wanting to be who they are. Shameful. And I'll read that again. It says, with only a few exceptions, the Afro-Brazilian press was unanimous in its rejection of Africa and African-based cultural practices, regardless of whether individual writers or papers favored or opposed the more controversial goal of national whitening. Blacks and mulattoes who supported whitening could logically and consistently reject any possible connection between Afro-Latin Americans and Africa. Let us seek not to perpetuate our race. I quote, this is what they said. Argued the Afro-Brazilian newspaper Oberdurente in 1918, but yes, to infiltrate ourselves into the bosom of the privileged race. Listen, the white race, because we repeat, we are not Africans, but rather purely Brazilians. But speaking from an imposing position of black pride and self-determination, Ogetolino 1924 was equally emphatic in its rejection of any tie between Afro-Brazilians and Africa. It's for the Africans, and my friend, it was for your great-grandfather, whose bones have returned to the earth and returned to dust. Africa is for whoever wants it, but not for us, not for the blacks of Brazil, who were born in Brazil, raised in Brazil, and have multiplied in Brazil. Now, a bit of history. During the slave trade, while they were bringing the ships over, and they was dropping people off in different landmass and different islands and so forth, Brazil got 99.9% of the slaves. So Brazil is and has the highest concentration of Africans in the world in regards to the slave trade. So that's just a nugget. They got the majority of Africans. Brazil did. Okay? And you can research that. Yet, as upwardly mobile Afro-Latin Americans turned their backs on Africa and embraced their societies of origin, those societies did not always return the embrace. Export-led economic growth and racial ideologies and behavior based on scientific racism and the concept of whitening combined to produce a tortured, contradictory situation for educated, ambitious blacks and mulattoes. An expanding economy offered significant opportunities for social and economic advancement, but as they sought to seize those opportunities, Afro-Latin Americans found themselves running headlong into racial barriers that took multiple forms: refusal of admission to restaurants, theaters, barbershops, hotels, other public facilities, private and occasionally prestigious public schools, refusal to enroll their children, social clubs, refusal to admit them, and most damaging of all, open or veiled job discrimination. So it's all over the world, y'all. It's all over the world, and you're getting it here today. You're getting it from me today. They had this going on in Latin America as well as in Northern America. It was all over the place. And as you heard me elucidate, that they brought all of these Europeans in. And so this is when, of course, this intermingling with indigenous people and diluting the seed, that you had these mulattoes. So you had these mulattoes who still were predominantly black, because the black gene is the strongest gene in the world. So they made it hard for them. You know, so you had, so listen to this. So you had a lot of white men. You had a lot of white men making babies. And you know they was doing a lot of raping. You know they was raping black women left and right. Come on, y'all. We know that. They was raping black women left and right. And then after they raped them, they abandoned their children. They didn't even own the children. They didn't even own them. Now, let's read on. None of these forms of discrimination were applied with the iron consistency of state-imposed segregation in the United States. Excuse me? They said none of these forms of discrimination were applied with the iron consistency of state-imposed segregation in the United States. I beg to differ, leading some African American visitors to Latin America during this period to conclude that the region was blessedly free from prejudice and discrimination. Really? Come on. You know that's a damn lie. Yet it was precisely because of such discrimination and prejudice, along with upwardly mobile Afro-Latin American sense of themselves as a group set apart both from the white middle class and from the black let me make sure I read this right, from the white middle class and from the black Polarius. Okay. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. It's proletariat. Okay. That this period witnessed such a burgeoning of black middle class cultural and social institutions from Havana to Buenos Aires. Afro-Latin Americans excluded from white social and civic organizations joined together to create a parallel universe of such entities. These included elite social clubs such as El Progreso, Santiago, Cuba, Atenas, Havana, La Perla, Nagra, Santo Domingo, Cosmos, Sao Paulo, and others, less prestigious but more numerous. Recreational societies, Cuba, Uruguay, dancing clubs, Brazil, athletic associations such as Alianza Lima and Asociado Intelecto Sao Garado, Sao Paulo, which sponsors soccer teams, track competitions, and other events, and civic organizations such as the Frederico dos Homestos Cor and the Centro Cívico Palmeiras in Brazil and Directorios Centro de las Sociedades de Color in Cuba. At the boundary between the lower levels of the black middle class and the upper levels of the black protectorate. There were mutual aid societies such as the Centro de Cacheros Havana, the Sociedad Protectoro dos Deliastos, Salvador and Las Protectora, and the Central Uruguay, Buenos Aires, and in Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, and Uruguay, and perhaps other countries as well, where extensive research on turn-of-the-century black organizations has yet to be done. An active black press chronicle the activities of these groups. So they started creating their own stuff. Okay. And it shows here, and it says from 18, the whitening of these areas. And it shows the black middle class in Buenos Aires during the time of 1904, and it has 4 black women is showing, and of course it mentions them. Okay, so now we got about 6 minutes left, and we're going to read a bit more, and we're going to be done. Okay, The elite social clubs were probably the most visible of the black organizations, if only because they were the ones most likely to attract the favorable attention of white elites and the establishment press. The Buenos Aires Illustrated magazine Casra Wow Caritas reported on several such clubs in 1905, where instead of the grotesque candombo and simba African-based dances, they danced in modern clothes and in the manner of Louis XV. This was the ultimate accolade. Afro-Latin Americans had proved themselves as successful as Euro-Latin Americans in producing a simulacrum of European culture in the New World, and indeed this was precisely the point, as the most prestigious of all the Afro-Cuban social clubs implicitly acknowledged in its choice of name, Club Athens Club. We are an institution, its charter members declared in 1917, that reflects the degree of culture's spiritual elevation and intelligence of the elements that we represent, as well as their aspirations toward constant progress. For these individuals, merchants, lawyers, journalists, students, property owners, the most potent symbol of the European-derived culture and progress that they sought was classical Greece. So they emulated, I don't know why they emulated that, but they did. And so the socialites and these Africans began to create, like we always do. We start to create our own clubs and banks and law firms and grocery stores and schools. So we pull ourselves up. We know how, when we come together, we know how to build. See, that's key. When we come together, we know how to build. We've done it before. And so we say, okay, we're going to leave y'all over there. We're going to do our thing. We know what to do. And so that's what they did. Some of the black social clubs attempted to ignore the realities of discrimination and prejudice, constructing, in the words of Cosmos, a club in Sao Paulo, a miniature nation of which we are valiant inhabitants and ardent patriots, a boat on the immense ocean gliding over tranquil seas. Members often found discrimination impossible to ignore. However, the denunciation and protest of racial barriers in theaters, restaurants, schools, parks, and other public facilities appeared frequently in the club's activities and discourse. This was even more the case in the Black Civic Association, which were explicitly devoted to racial uplift in Brazil, Cuba, Uruguay, three of the countries most powerfully affected by European immigration. These organizations eventually gave rise to black political parties. Okay, so we're going to stop there. We have more, but we're going to stop there for now. And we're going to leave it for the next podcast. So remember to like and to share if you so desire. And we'll be seeing you guys next time, okay? Make sure you come and visit us. We appreciate you so much. And until next time, as always, keep a fresh mind. Stay up, keep your spirit right. Share, share, share. Until the next time, have a great evening, okay? Take care.